Over the past year, I've covered a number of different lines dedicated to Planet of the Apes, and today I'm really pleased to turn my attention on the recent relaunched Planet of the Apes line from Mego. I say relaunched, of course, because Planet of the Apes did feature in the original Mego lineup way back when in the 1970s, and these figures have now been re-released and in some cases updated, along with a couple of brand new characters. So I'll start off by taking a look at Cornelius, and the packaging for all of these figures is pretty much identical. It does have that classic Planet of the Apes poster design, which will be very familiar to anyone who owned the DVD set back in the early 2000s, featuring that sepia-toned beach with the Statue of Liberty coming out of the sand there. And of course, behind the figure, we can see the Charlton Heston character Taylor on the beach there, and of course, silhouetted, we can see the image of the ape profile, which is pretty cool. I really like this design. I think it works perfectly well. It's perfectly appropriate for this line, and it's very attractive. You can put this on display and it looks really nice. On the reverse of each card, we have a different photograph or production still from each of the films, which is fantastic. So in this case, we obviously have a production photo of Cornelius here, and this looks really good. Again, very presentable, very nice touch that we actually have a proper image from the film. So once we've got Cornelius out of his box, I think the first impression you have is that he looks to be pretty authentic to what we see on screen. Well, at first glance anyway. On closer inspection, you will notice certain details that aren't quite accurate. The shade of green on his costume, for example, is a little bit too dark. The collar, it doesn't actually have the right detailing on it, as we see in the movie. And the head sculpt itself is pretty interesting. I'm not a huge fan of this look, especially with the painted in pink there. That looks a little bit too silly. Now, if you're wondering why the head sculpt isn't the best likeness in the world, well, that's probably because it is pretty much a straight re-release of the original figure that was released way back in the 1970s. Now, it's not exact, but it is pretty close. And what you'll probably notice about the 70s releases is that they tend to have a lot of creative license when it came to the costuming. A really good example of that is these fluffy cuffs that he has. I'm not entirely sure why they opted to give him these. This is definitely an invention of the toy company. This isn't what he has in the actual film, but I guess it made him look a little bit more animalistic, a bit more cuddly. I don't mind this, but it's not screen accurate. His costume is essentially a lycra stocking, and on his feet he has these two rubber soles, which again aren't strictly accurate, but I am actually quite grateful for them because they do allow him to stand up without falling over, which is brilliant. All in all, I have some mixed feelings when it comes to Cornelius. On the one hand, there's a surprising amount of accuracy in his costume, which I think is quite nice. Some nice attention to detail there. I do like the ape glyph that he has on his chest, and I've always had a soft spot for the character. On the other hand, the head sculpt isn't the best, and there's some certainly interesting creative decisions that have been taken. Next up we have Dr. Zaius, and of course on the reverse of the packaging we have another production still, which is very nice, very clean, clear image of Dr. Zaius there, which I think looks pretty good on display. Now, once again, Dr. Zaius, of course, is a straight re-release of the original figure that was made in the 1970s, and I have to say he's probably the most egregious example of a figure that radically departs from his on-screen appearance. His costume here is almost completely wrong. Instead of his long 3/4 length jacket, and of course being coloured brightly orange, they've opted for a sort of creamy colour, and it's obviously a much shorter jacket that he wears. It doesn't have any of the ape glyphs, and although I'd say the head sculpt is actually a lot stronger than the Cornelius in terms of likeness, the colouring isn't so good. Obviously they've opted for a bright orange rather than that sort of strawberry blonde colour. And I guess it must have been the fashion back in the 70s for these Planet of the Apes figures to have those fluffy cuffs, because of course Dr. Zaius also seems to be sporting them as well. Now I think in all honesty this is meant to represent the fair, but obviously it just doesn't look quite right. Interestingly though, they do give him specially moulded unique boots, because these boots actually have some ape hieroglyphics on them, and I think it's the only time these boots are used in this modern lineup. I think there's probably two ways of judging this figure. On the one hand, if you're a toy collector from the 1970s and have fond memories of this character and say you sold him, lost him, maybe you never had him, and this is your second chance to pick him up, then I think you're going to really dig this approach. However, if you're a modern collector like myself and you like things to be a little bit more authentic to what we see on screen, then he's probably going to be something of a disappointment. Next up, we have the Ape Soldier, and the Soldier, I have to say, is probably one of my favourite characters in the line. I've always really loved this costume, and the image they've chosen there is a pretty strong one. I think this is very presentable and looks really nice. And the soldier represents the first of the updated figures. So this isn't a straight re-release of the soldier that was released in the original run in the 1970s. This is a brand new sculpt, along with a brand new costume. As you can see here, the colouring of the costume is a lot more accurate. We have that deep purple rather than the brown that they originally opted for. He's been given a new tunic, new boots, and a brand new head. Now, I've got mixed feelings about this head sculpt. I appreciate that it is brand new. I think that's really, really nice. I don't think it's the best sculpt in the world. I feel like they've got a little bit of work to go yet to really create that really classic ape look from the film. But nevertheless, I do appreciate making the effort here. I'm not really a big fan of having this open mouth. I just think it looks a little bit gawky, and he's overall just a little bit too friendly looking. I think with the ape soldiers, you want to be a little bit afraid. They've got to look a little bit more stern, I think. But I do really have to commend Mego for the new costume. I think this is brilliant. I really love the rubber material they've used for the tunic. It's very nice, the touch. It's got a real nice texture to it. And it looks pretty authentic to what we see on screen too, albeit in a very toyetic manner. He's also given brand new boots, and there's some attempt here to make these specifically Planet of the Apes boots. We can see round the toes, there's actually some grooves in there to resemble what we see on screen. Now, it's not actually quite accurate, but I do commend the attempt, and I think this looks pretty good. He's also given an updated and pretty screen accurate rifle, which I think looks pretty good all in all. And I was surprised to see that his hands are able to be flexible enough to be able to accommodate this weapon, so he can actually fairly comfortably hold it. Now, it doesn't necessarily look quite right, but I actually think it looks okay. It's not too bad. I'm really pleased that he can actually grip this weapon. I think that's really cool. Next up, we have another one of my favourite characters and one of my favourite designs from Planet of the Apes, and that, of course, is General Ursus. And they've done, again, a very nice job of the card art. I think this is a great image to put on display. And anyone who's familiar with the original 70s release will immediately spot that this guy's had a significant upgrade in terms of his costume. In fact, he bears almost no resemblance to the original release. The head sculpt is brand new and painted completely differently. He's got obviously a brand new tunic, completely different colourings, but he's also missing the weapons that came with the original release, which is kind of cool. Now, they're not screen accurate, he never has that assault rifle, of course, and I don't remember seeing him with that sword, but they're kind of cool accessories to have. In terms of the new sculpt, I actually think the sculpt itself is pretty good. It's fairly accurate to what we see on screen, which is nice. I think where this figure is let down really is on the paint apps, particularly on the eyes. Those green eyes are a little bit too bright, a little bit too piercing. And again, there's something about the lips that have been sculpted there which don't look quite threatening enough. But I really like the approach they've taken with his tunic and, of course, his collar there. It's very nicely textured, it's nice to the touch, and it looks pretty good, I have to say. All in all, this is pretty effective. Now, it's maybe a little bit brighter than it appears on screen, but I think that works perfectly well for a toyetic figure like this one. And all in all, I think it's pretty decent. Sadly, he doesn't come with any accessories at all, but I think he makes up for it for the improved new costume that he has. And as I said, for someone who's always been a fan of this character, I think this is probably the best iteration we've had in this scale. So I'm a big fan of it. I think they've done a really nice job. And then finally for today, we have Caesar. Now, again, they've taken a very nice production still from the photo for the back of the box, and this is nice and consistent with the other figures in the collection. And as for the figure himself, well, I believe this is the first time he's seen life in this scale, in the Mego line, in fact, which is absolutely fantastic, so it's nice to have a brand new character. Now, of course, Caesar is played by Roddy McDowall, the same actor who played Cornelius, so the head sculpt has been reused, but that is perfectly appropriate. And this time, in my opinion, the paint apps are a little bit better, it's a little bit stronger. Now, of all the figures in the line, his costume is probably the most simplistic, and maybe not the best, in all truth. It is obviously just one giant boiler suit, and they've sewn in some of the details of what should be pockets, which doesn't really work that well, in my opinion, but nevertheless, it does look fairly accurate to what we see on screen, and it is made of a nice thick cotton as well, so it is fairly pleasant to the touch. Once again, they have recycled those moccasins from the Cornelius figure, but they seem to do the job. They work pretty well in this context. And they've then given the assault rifle that came with one of the gorilla soldiers in the original releases, and I think, again, in this context, works very well for conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and it's actually quite a nice mould. So I'd have to say he's a pretty fun addition to this lineup, and it's nice to have another one of the classic Planet of the Apes films represented in the collection. So then, all things considered, this is a pretty fun collection of figures from Mego. If you're a fan of Planet of the Apes like me, then you're going to want to pick these up. And I think there's something here for everyone, regardless of whether you're a new collector or someone who's been collecting them since you were a child in the 1970s. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.